The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk as 12-year-old Malik walked home from school, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Inside it were his notebooks, a half-eaten sandwich, and a comic book he had been saving for the weekend. But before he could take another step, the sharp screech of a police siren cut through the quiet street. A patrol car rolled up beside him, and out stepped Officer Reynolds, a man known in the neighborhood for his harsh demeanor. His eyes locked onto Malik with an unsettling intensity. "Hey, kid," Reynolds barked. "What's in the bag?" Malik hesitated. "Just my school stuff, sir." But Reynolds wasn't listening. In one swift motion, he yanked the backpack from Malik's grasp and rifled through it. His expression twisted into something unreadable before he muttered, "This looks stolen." Malik's heart pounded. "No, sir. That's me." "Quiet," Reynolds snapped. "Hands where I can see them." Tears welled in Malik's eyes, panic rising in his chest. People walked by, some slowing to watch, but no one intervened. Just as Reynolds reached for his radio, ready to call it in, a sleek black car pulled up. The door swung open, and out stepped a tall man in a sharp suit, Judge Harrison, Malik's father. The air grew thick with tension. Reynolds' face paled. He had just made a huge mistake. Judge Harrison stepped out of the car, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. His sharp gaze moved from Malik to Officer Reynolds, instantly reading the situation. His face remained calm, but there was an unmistakable authority in his stance. "Is there a problem here, officer?" His voice was steady, controlled, but carried a weight that made Reynolds shift uncomfortably. Reynolds tightened his grip on Malik's backpack, still holding it like evidence of some imagined crime. "Just doing my job, sir. This kid was acting suspicious, and I needed to check his belongings." Malik's breath was shaky. He wanted to speak up, to defend himself, but something about the officer's cold stare kept him silent. He knew that no matter what he said, it wouldn't matter. Judge Harrison stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Suspicious. A child walking home from school with his own backpack. Reynolds hesitated, his grip loosening slightly. He knew who Judge Harrison was. Everyone in law enforcement did. A respected judge known for his unwavering sense of justice. This wasn't just any upset parent. But Reynolds wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. "I had reason to believe." "Reason?" Judge Harrison cut him off. "Then tell me, Officer Reynolds, what exactly made you think my son was a suspect?" Reynolds opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. The growing crowd watched in silence, waiting for his next move. A tense silence hung in the air as Reynolds shifted his weight, gripping Malik's backpack like it was proof of something he couldn't quite explain. His eyes darted to the growing crowd, neighbors, shop owners, even a few teenagers recording on their phones. The weight of their stares made his pulse quicken, but he couldn't back down. Not in front of them. Not in front of Judge Harrison. "I received a call," Reynolds finally muttered, his voice less certain than before. "A report about a stolen bag matching this description." Judge Harrison's jaw tightened. A call from who? Reynolds hesitated. He had no real answer. No call had come in. He had seen Malik, made an assumption, and acted. But admitting that now, in front of all these eyes, wasn't an option. Malik, still frozen in place, clenched his fists. His mind raced back to every lesson his father had taught him about handling moments like this. Stay calm. Keep your hands visible. Don't argue. But now, standing next to his father, he felt something different. Anger. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, being treated like a suspect. A voice cut through the tension. "That's Malik's bag," an older woman said from the sidewalk. Mrs. Green, the neighborhood baker, stepped forward. I see him carry it every day. What exactly are you accusing him of? Reynolds' grip on the backpack loosened further, but his pride kept him from letting go. His badge gave him power, power he was used to people fearing. But now that power was slipping, and he wasn't sure what to do next. Reynolds' fingers twitched as he glanced between Judge Harrison and the crowd, his authority slipping with every second of silence. He knew he should let go of the bag, walk away, and claim it was all a misunderstanding. But his pride wouldn't let him. Instead, his jaw tightened. "I need to verify," Reynolds said, forcing his voice to sound firm. "Just doing my job." Judge Harrison took another step forward, his presence commanding, his expression unreadable. "Officer Reynolds, my son is not a suspect. You have no evidence, no report, and no reason to detain him. So tell me again, why are you still holding his backpack?" The crowd murmured, eyes locked on Reynolds, waiting for his response. Malik felt his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He wanted his bag back. He wanted to go home. But more than anything, he wanted to understand why this was happening at all. Mrs. Green crossed her arms. "I've lived here 30 years, officer. I've seen you stop kids before, but only certain kids." Her voice was steady, but the weight of her words sent a ripple through the crowd. Reynolds' grip finally slackened. The bag slid an inch down his fingers. But just as Malik reached for it, Reynolds pulled back slightly, as if letting go meant admitting something he wasn't ready to face. The tension was suffocating. And then, like a storm gathering strength, another voice rose from the crowd. "Are you going to admit you were wrong, or are you going to make this worse?" All eyes were on Reynolds. His breath was shallow. His fingers still clenched the straps. And for the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Reynolds' grip on the bag tightened again, his knuckles white. His mind was racing, trying to find a way out. But every option led back to the same truth. He had nothing to stand on. The crowd was against him. Judge Harrison was against him. And deep down, he knew he had made a mistake. But before he could decide his next move, the crackle of his radio cut through the tense air. "Unit 7, what's your status?" a voice asked. Reynolds hesitated before pressing the button. "Handling a situation," he muttered. But then another voice came through, one that sent a visible shiver through him. "Reynolds, where are you? I need you back at the station." Now, it was his superior, Captain Dawson. The crowd didn't know what that meant, but Judge Harrison did. He saw the flicker of panic in Reynolds' eyes, the realization that something bigger was at play. This wasn't just about Malik's backpack anymore. Something was happening behind the scenes. Reynolds exhaled sharply, looking around like a trapped animal. He suddenly dropped the backpack, letting it hit the ground at Malik's feet. "Fine," he muttered, his voice low. "Take it." Malik bent down slowly, grabbing his bag, his fingers shaking slightly. But before he could step back, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The doors unlocked, and two men in suits stepped out, scanning the scene with sharp, assessing eyes. Judge Harrison straightened, instantly recognizing the look of federal agents. The tension in the air shifted. This wasn't just about Reynolds anymore. Something much bigger was happening. One of the men pulled out a badge. "Judge Harrison, we need to speak with you immediately. It's urgent." Reynolds turned pale. Malik gripped his father's sleeve. The crowd fell into hushed whispers. The story had just taken a turn no one expected. Judge Harrison's eyes stayed locked on the two agents as the weight of the moment settled in. He could feel Malik tense beside him, gripping his sleeve tighter. The entire situation had already spiraled out of control, but now it was something more, something unexpected. One of the agents stepped forward, lowering his voice. Judge, we have reason to believe Officer Reynolds is involved in an internal investigation. We need to ask you a few questions. Reynolds stiffened. His face, already pale, drained of what little color remained. What? His voice cracked slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. The agent gave him a hard look. We do. The crowd murmured, watching as Reynolds shifted his stance, looking for a way out. He had spent so long using his badge as a shield, but now it was turning against him. Judge Harrison crossed his arms. So stopping my son had nothing to do with a stolen backpack, did it? His voice was calm, but sharp. Reynolds swallowed hard. The air was thick with tension, and for the first time, he had no control. He wasn't the one asking the questions anymore. "Step over here, officer," the other agent said firmly. "We need to have a word, privately." Reynolds glanced at the crowd, at the cameras, at Malik, who stood there still holding his backpack. He looked like he wanted to argue, to resist, but something in the agent's eyes told him it would only make things worse. Slowly, hesitantly, he stepped back toward the SUV. Judge Harrison let out a slow breath, his eyes meeting Malik's. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Malik nodded, but his hands were still gripping the straps of his bag. "Yeah," he said, but his voice wavered. I just want to go home." Judge Harrison placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Let's go." As they turned to leave, Malik glanced back one last time. Reynolds stood by the SUV, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. The officers hadn't arrested him, not yet, but something told Malik that this wasn't over for him. Not by a long shot. And just as they were about to step into their car, one of the agents spoke again. "Judge Harrison," he called out, "we might need to speak with you again soon. There's more to this." Judge Harrison nodded, but he didn't stop walking. Whatever was coming next, he would be ready. But right now, his only focus was getting his son home. As Malik and his father drove away, the weight of everything that had just happened settled in. The streets outside the car window passed in a blur, but Malik couldn't stop thinking about it. How fast things escalated, how helpless he had felt, and how, even with his father there, it had almost gone another way. Judge Harrison drove in silence for a while before finally speaking. "I know that was a lot," he said, his voice softer than before. "Are you sure you're okay?" Malik hesitated. He wanted to say yes, to just forget about it, but he knew he couldn't. "I don't get it," he finally said. "If you hadn't shown up, what would have happened?" His father sighed, gripping the wheel a little tighter. "I don't know," he admitted. "And that's the problem." Malik stared out the window, his thoughts still racing. He had heard his dad talk about things like this before, about fairness, about justice. But this time, it wasn't a conversation. It had happened to him. As they pulled into their driveway, Judge Harrison turned to face his son. "What happened back there wasn't right. But you did nothing wrong. Don't ever forget that." Malik nodded slowly, unbuckling his seatbelt. He wasn't sure if this was something he could forget. But he knew one thing: he would never see the world the same way again.